Right. Just take a few more seconds for more people join in. I can see the attendees trickling in, so a minute more and then we'll kick off the session. Okay, so let's kick it off. Welcome everyone. Good day to all of you, and excited to actually see all of you join in for this webinar series. It's quite a momentous day for the Beckn Protocol and its journey, because this marks the this marks the initiation of an ongoing dialogue around open networks and specifically the digital public good, Beckn, and so forth. So this forum is intended to activate a global dialogue around this concept of open networks and protocols in general, and the role digital public goods like Beckn can actually play in augmenting this journey and reimagining how we look at digital commerce in general across the board. Beckn Protocol in itself has been quite a remarkable journey to take a close look at from its inception about 3 years ago. It's actually grown leaps and bounds in helping us reimagine how digital commerce is done across sectors and so forth. So it's been interesting to see its evolution from an open specification effort 3 years ago to where it is right now, and the role it's actually playing in manifesting live networks in India and so forth. So there's a lot of progress being made, a lot of interesting new possibilities being discovered by the day, and it gives us a lot of optimism to see how this idea shapes into the future, and how the entire landscape can be relooked at with a fresh lens. So to speak about this quite an interesting subject, I'm excited to actually be joined by two notable speakers today. First, of course, the session on open networks and introducing Beckn would be addressed by Dr. Pramod Varma. And in the second half of this session, we would also be joined by Dr. Jonathan Donor for an interactive dialogue session between both of them. So in terms of a quick sense of the house rules that we probably have for this 1 hour session, it will be broken down to primarily two key segments. The first segment would cover the concept of open networks, and the Beckn digital public good would be introduced by Dr. Pramod Varma. And in the second half of the session, we would have this dialogue between Pramod and Jonathan, moderated by me. And towards the closing segment of this session, we would also give a sneak peek into some of the other dialogues that are part of the roster, which will be opened up through this forum for more sessions in the months to come, along with a lot of the resources that are actually available through the open source effort in Beckn. So this is how the agenda is for today. So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Pramod Varma to kick off this program and take up segment number 1, the role of open networks, as well as segment number 2, introducing Beckn. Dr. Pramod Varma needs no introduction as such. He has been a pioneer in a lot of the digital transformation efforts India has seen over the past decade or more, cutting across the National Identity Infrastructure Program, the National Payments Infrastructure Program, along with several other sectoral digital intervention efforts. So he's been quite a notable advocate of open source and digital public goods in general across the board, both in India as well as in global forums. So we're pleased to actually have him here as the co-author of the Beckn Protocol and as well as the key advocate behind the story of open networks and what the Beckn Protocol can enable through this particular effort. So let me hand over to you, Dr. Pramod. And with that, you can actually kick off this segment. I'll stop my screen share right now and you can open up your screen, Pramod.
Thank you, Rajesh. Again, welcome all of you. Pleasure to be here. And thank you, Jonathan, as well for joining. I know it's a bit early morning in the US. It's an exciting topic for sure. So the two segments, as Rajesh is saying. So why do we even build open network? Is that one generic question that comes up. While it's been done before, it's almost always a surprise when we introduce this topic, because at least in the internet world, the open network is not a concept that's been tried out. Mostly platform play, right? So I think it's been a bit maybe bleeding edge, I would think, attempting to do something like this. But there's significant thinking behind it and significant reason behind it. And that's the good thing is that a very large community, and I should thank the community, I should take this moment to thank the community, very vibrant Beckn Protocol community, just couldn't have been done without you guys. So I think it's a large community effort to bring it all as public good, open source effort. And then, systematically try applying that to various domains. So let me just share, and I'll take a minute to bring it up. Okay, so give a minute. So it loads up. Okay, so let me take you through very quickly. And some of this, we have talked about, multiple forums before, and many of you have been watching keenly what's going on, with respect to India's digital infrastructure. So I won't take too deep, and we will definitely have follow-up deep tech sessions as well in terms of going into the protocols and discussions and comparisons and why it's designed in a particular way, why not, and so on. I think that's much better people than I had to talk about that. So we'll bring them soon to all of you. So just to take a step back, and this is important to understand. Post-internet, once the initial wave of HTML pages and websites got over, the late 90s, the platforms started rising up. And, Amazon, Google, subsequently Facebook or Meta, Twitter, Uber, Lyft, and then it sort of never stopped, right? The platform, the rise of the platform continued through the smartphone, and smartphone launching iPhone, and then subsequently next year, Android, 2008, was a pivotal moment for platform play, because now every, sort of individual has a computer in their hand, and with GPS enabled, with camera enabled, with touch enabled, with voice enabled, it's just mesmerizing, right? What you could do with them. So if you're an entrepreneur, what you do is to pretty much follow the platform playbook and try to build up, big company, hopefully unicorn, and then bigger and so on. Sort of the standard playbook that everybody did. And this models all, but there are two sort of platforms. There are aggregation, two-sided marketplace. That's what we would focus today on. And classic examples are Uber, Lyft, or in India context, Zomato, Ola, Swiggy, Amazon for that matter, Flipkart for that matter. These companies, almost all these companies have a two-sided marketplace that they would do, right? And they would almost always take the platform, play a very, very powerful aggregator role into platform, aggregating supply on one side and demand on the other side. But the consumer acquisition demand side almost always they would play initially sort of, you know, throw a lot of incentives at both sides to acquire drivers in the case of Uber, hotel or homestays in the case of Airbnb, and so on, right? And they would acquire consumers using the popular consumer acquisition strategies, ads and throwing a lot of money and deals and discounts and everything else that they can do. And once they have the critical mass, and almost always they would also do ads and so on. So if it's a traditional data play as well. So it's not just a platform play, it's also a significant data play, and they would do, right? And there's nothing right, wrong about it. It's almost brilliantly executed from an entrepreneur perspective, as investor perspective. But the flip side, on the other hand, it's also important. I mean, we took a decade or nearly 2 decades, a decade and a half, to get to this point where once the platform goes into a large aggregator who has aggregated enough of supply and significant demand, which is the consumer side, it starts becoming almost like a monopoly, right? Or at best duopoly. You don't see more than 1 or 2 companies, and even Uber, Lyft. Lyft is really small compared to Uber, but even they're nibbling at the foot of the big guy. This is a pattern everywhere. You would see food industry, hospitality, mobility, commerce. You would see 1 or 2 very, very, very dominant players, almost one being the biggest one. And then, of course, lots of sort of strugglers in one sense it's hard to get customer acquisition, supplier. You need lots of funding to be able to actually execute the dual-sided market strategy. And it's not easy for every entrepreneur. But again, people who pulled it off, very well done. But also to do with the app stores. You see the same angst with the app stores, where app stores are now starting to demand, because they're all, in one sense, they've become middlemen. They've become an information intermediary, a digital intermediary in one sense, holding both data, behavior control, and supply and demand. So as a supplier, almost always they pamper the consumer. Consumers are less affected because we like it. We all shop in Amazon and take Uber whenever the driver shows up, and it's not so bad. But for the supplier, for the provider, it gets very hard, very fast. And that's where the commission structures kick in, right? And world is sort of waking up. And EU, for example, unlike America, continues to be very, very opportunity-driven, entrepreneurial-driven, capitalist viewpoint. And most of these are American companies, so they are not so bad. China firewalled themselves out. So it's pretty much the rest of the countries that are grappling with this larger questions about monopoly, big tech, data, and fundamentally provider side equity. Are the drivers getting what they do? And recently one of my friends in California was saying that he took a ride to San Francisco airport to home, and he paid $37, and he was asking the driver what he was getting, and he showed his phone, and he was getting $19. That's roughly 50% kept by the aggregator, right? And it's showing up here as well in India. So it's important that people are striking, and very, very interestingly, workforce is fighting back. Providers are starting to fight back, and you will see this in Europe, much part of Europe, Latin America, most of India, of course. A lot of angst, a lot of fight back by whether the restaurant association going up to create some sort of anti-competitive against anti-competitive measures. And drivers shutting off AC in summer, saying tough luck, talk to the company because I hardly get any money these days, right? And so on. And it's happening across industries. Right? It's not, and it's a model issue, right? It's not I wouldn't say it's an issue. It's a nature of the beast. I mean, it's just this how two-sided markets grow. They have to make revenue, so they would squeeze as much as possible, and sort of the nature. And the question we have to really ask is that how does regulators, government, and society at large respond to such issues, large-scale issues? And Europe is going all out legal. I mean, they're always legal first, law first people. So they are the first guy to push USB-C, and now they are looking at interoperability between messaging, which is huge. WhatsApp can send message to Signal to iMessage. It's going to be crazy, but I don't think, I'm not sure whether it'll happen, but Europe is trying. They're trying to bring interoperability law, digital market acts, and so on. Very, very interesting moves. Now, I'm not sure whether it's right or wrong, but partly right, almost always partly right, right? And interoperability becomes the essence. Interoperability and choice becomes the essence of this argument. So interoperability as an anti-competitive, anti-monopoly behavior is somewhat being set now as a means to address, interoperability as a means to address a more open environment rather than a closed monopolistic environment, right? So countries are taking very, very strategic view. And if one is in terms of interoperability and portability, that means a choice to move from, choice to move data, their profile. A driver wants to sign up in 2 places. Can I move my credentials? Can I move my proof of rating, proof of reputation, proof of work? Can I port all that thing? Those questions are coming up. Or am I locked into one platform? Interoperability allows a lot more players to play. UPI, we have seen that in India. UPI is a classic example of an interoperable payment network with 300 plus banks, wallets, apps, 300, 400 apps are all playing in, banks plus apps, all interoperable, right? So you get that leads us to the choice aspect. It gives choice to people, it gives choice to providers, it gives creates a potential to deal with the monopoly. Not perfectly, there's still, you can still create interesting modes, and it's probably the right thing to do for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs must create modes of their own. But for a regulator, though, they are thinking of creating slightly more, what you call a level playing field, open innovation marketplace. And of course, number 3 is a question of sovereignty. And this is coming up especially during the time of war, when the payment networks, the leading 2 card payment networks, literally flip the kill switch on a particular country who is the aggressor in a time of war. But whether they're right or wrong, whether the war is never good for humanity, it's a stupid thing to do. But question was asked by other countries when the European countries are watching, and at least 2 countries I know of, they're significantly analyzing their digital backbone and asking this question: does our country's backbone, the flip kill switch, lies with the one company somewhere else? And what does it mean to us, right? So these questions are being asked again by countries. And of course, they're all interested in creating local innovation as well, because it's another trend, right? Nationalism, deglobalization trend. We are in that decade of nationalism and deglobalization, unlike early 2000, right? So you will see the cycles playing out, and many of these questions get asked by the policymaker and the government. But the interesting thing, though, interoperable networks are not new. We just forgot about it conveniently post 2000 and let big techs do whatever they want to do, which is also good for consumers. Tremendous innovation, right? Nothing wrong. But there's a balance of act, which is starting to happen. And we have seen this in the email. I can send email from Gmail to Yahoo to Outlook, Microsoft email or whatever, and now Proton email, any other new age privacy-centric email, whatever you want to build, right? It's very powerful because the underlying protocol was interoperable. Same reason why everyone is a king on the internet. If only you could attract good audience to your site. It doesn't have to be any particular platform. You can actually find, as long as you have a good information thing. But when it comes to commerce, it was not that easy. And we have seen this very, very interestingly with phones as well, right? GSM network. Classic example of private innovation Airtel in India or Jio in India, AT&T in the US, Voda in Europe or wherever, and you can all, literally pick up the phone and talk. And the power of that interoperability is not to be taken lightly. I think the power of unifying that and creating a massive push towards, sort of unifying various parts of the society is enormous. And we have seen this playing out multiple times. We have also, quite interestingly, we have also seen this playing out in travel industry. That's probably the only commerce industry that we have seen. Airline travel. It's not generic travel. Airline travel, for some reason, they were ahead of the curve, creating sort of multi-party open network. And of course, Visa and MasterCard and all showed it, the card network, and UPI, of course, in India is a classic example. Now, account aggregator in India is creating an open, decentralized data network in financial data. So we have seen it playing in the past, and we are doing it even now. So this shouldn't be a surprise for people if we push the boundary to say, oh, okay, if you can do it in airline ticketing, why not in other parts of hotel booking, or why not in taxi booking? So that precisely was the reason Beckn Protocol was formed, sort of began, because we were asking that question ourselves. Why not push the protocol-based open network, multi-party innovation, coming to, but interoperability maintained through the protocol? Why wouldn't this work on hotel booking? Why wouldn't this work on taxi booking, or even general commerce? So we asked these questions. We were obviously pushing the boundary a bit, but questions were not, not at all. I think the time had come to ask those questions. But again, then we, began the Beckn Protocol. So I'll just walk you through a little bit of that. And the idea of Beckn Protocol is to create the interoperable, but the way Beckn Protocol was done, unlike in the travel industry, or in the case of some earlier initiatives like that, quite similar to SMTP, HTTP, it's more open protocol. So it's a protocol itself is not a private good. It's a public good. It's on GitHub. There's a fantastic Discord community around it. 1,000+ members, very, very vibrant, dominated in India because of India's adoption, but now communities are being formed in Africa, some part of Europe, and so on. There'll be further sessions on some of that detailing later. But once that protocol is as a digital public good at the bottom, which is open specification, you can imagine various networks. Now it's like the telecom network. GSM is just a spec. SMTP is just a spec. Someone has to create the runtime on top of it to create the network, trust around the network, end-to-end encryption, registries, and so on. So that becomes the digital public infrastructure. Now, infrastructure need not be global. It can be local. So in the case of India, we are creating local India's network, and Europe could create using Beckn Protocol. Any part of Europe, at the region level, country level, could create their own digital public infrastructure, which is nothing but the network. But the real innovation does not come. I mean, there is innovation about thinking protocol and designing it. So sort of technologies, geeks will like it. But creating network is not enough. Real value is generated when a vibrant, innovator, entrepreneurial ecosystem is innovating on top of this network. Like the UPI was found soon in the account aggregator in India, or in the case of mail, with Google Mail giving tremendous experience, taking a lot of customers from earlier Yahoo, Hotmail, and people are constantly innovating. If that innovation stops, the bottom two layers are almost always useless. Okay, so the innovation comes from all of you, many of you who are actually innovating out there. And the Beckn itself is an open transaction protocol to cater to specific parts of the digital economy. It's open source, zero runtime. Beckn itself, unlike Web3, Beckn doesn't run a server. Beckn Protocol or community, there are sandboxes and community servers for testing, but there's no real production servers run by. So there's no take control. Beckn community or the protocol or the foundation doesn't control any runtime and hence access to any commerce data or anything of that sort. And it's almost, it's a protocol, so it's technology neutral. You can build Beckn servers, Beckn API servers in Go, Node.js, or whatever thing that you fancy. And the way it works is basically unbundling the two sides of the network, right? So the Beckn protocol is basically in the middle. Specification, Beckn protocol is nothing but a set of API specification and technology specification, digital signature specification for trust, registry specification for trust, and so on. Without any intermediate platform. You can see no intermediate here, right? No platform here. But there are many on the consumer side. There can be many apps on the consumer, quite like the UPI, and quite a lot of providers, quite the UPI banks and so on, other providers, right? So many providers, many apps, and you can sort of choose. But the real idea is to provide sellers or providers on one side can choose their platform of choice and their catalog provider in one sense. Transaction server, any technology provider they can choose to connect themselves to the network. Once it's like a SMTP server, right? Email server or POP endpoint. And once they connect into the server, they actually get demand from any of the demand side apps, from the buyer side apps. So it's a very powerful way to expand the pie. That's how you want to think about it. It is not don't think of Beckn protocol effort as a Uber killer, or Airbnb killer. That's a very naive way of thinking about it. Thinking about this should be about what comes after platform is the network of platforms. That's how you want to think about it. We rode the platform economy for nearly 2 decades. What comes after platform? Almost always the networks. And the network is not one platform, network of platforms. And when network of platforms come through, you need some sort of interoperability in play, and that's what Beckn protocol is doing. So we are moving from this siloed, two-sided marketplaces or platforms to many one-sided marketplace that each of them can focus on their value. Either you're playing on the provider side, seller side, or you might be playing on consumer side as a super app or a consumer app, or you may be playing on both sides. Nothing wrong in it. As an entrepreneur, you can have a consumer app and a provider platform as well. But except that you are not the only one who's providing, you can get demand onto your seller side platform from many apps. And similarly, your platform, app, business, consumer app can discover many catalogs and products from many seller platforms at the back, not just yours. That's how you want to think about it. And interestingly, Beckn is not limited to a particular domain. The multiple communities within sub-communities within Beckn working on mobility spec, e-commerce spec, health UHI, universal health care. It's not a health data, it's about health transaction, like telemedicine transaction or booking a hospital appointment or a doctor appointment, or calling an ambulance, booking an ambulance and so on. So it's mostly transaction side, it's not the data side of the thing. It's basically the connection between the provider and seller. That's how you think about it. And soon in skilling, job discovery, and so on. And very interesting possibilities exist in the sector. And in India, we are ONDC. If you have not been hearing ONDC, you should definitely check out. ONDC is a live network using Beckn Commerce Protocol. Similarly, Nammayatri, which is our world, first peer-to-peer, permissionless mobility network. In Bangalore, Tumkur, Mysore, they're piloting, they're still piloting. That pilot is a very powerful and without any intermediary, a peer-to-peer mobility booking. So you almost always book directly with the auto rickshaw driver or a taxi driver. And if you're paying $37 or 250 rupees, it directly goes to the, other than maybe a convenience fee taken by the app, it goes to the driver, which is enormous value. This is why some of these are very, very attractive and going viral by themselves. And Kochi, obviously, it started the world's first mobility network. They're spreading across Kerala right now. Multimodal mobility, metro, taxi, buses, and so on. Many of them are starting to join there. And UHI is under the health stack, India's health stack called ABDM, Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. Under that, UHI is a transaction layer, which is also using one of the Beckn vertical in the health vertical. And there might be a very high chance there you watch out for a hackathon around March, maybe on the skilling, jobs, internships, discovery network, which is the last one. Maybe some of you can join that as well. And don't want to take too much of time. I'm conscious of time. So we have Kochi Mobility Network live, and you can see Yatri app, multiple services providers for auto rickshaws, there's apps there for the driver apps, taxi driver apps, and of course, multiple consumer apps, including a reference app called Yap. So that's very, very interesting. And learning is that governments and policymakers are looking at equity, inclusion, local innovation, removing concentration risk, monopoly risk. That's their care, and that's what they look at. Whereas citizens and civil societies are looking at choice, inclusion and self-participation, sort of why self-sovereign IDs and some of these are attractive for civil societies. It's the same reason that they are attracted to Beckn and Beckn Open Network is because of they believe the real vulnerable, SMEs and small-scale traders can finally get direct access to the demand side, direct access to demand with no single choking point at the middle, no center intermediary. There are multiple platforms and choices. So, and of course, but for entrepreneurs, that's where the real innovation will come from. Without the last vertical, none of this will happen. So the last vertical here is entrepreneurs and market makers. And almost again, the largest incumbents may not join first, but definitely there are a lot more second-tier startups and people, aspirational startups who are actually joining. They are not yet grown, they're growing. And they have to grow from 20 million users to 30 million, 50 million to 200 million. And that 10x will not come by just themselves. It's very, very, very hard to get to that. So that's the real interest for them, is that when the pie expands, everybody gets to eat a lot more. And that's a real interest from the market players, right? And if you are an open source enthusiast and technologies, do join the Discord community, contribute to the spec. And if you're a researcher and policy expert like Jonathan here, have your students study, analyze, give us feedback on what works. How do you govern open networks? What's the right and wrong about governance? What is the past experience? What does the future look like? How do you build trust on an open network? How does pricing work in open network? And very, very interesting possibilities there. And of course, infrastructure funding agencies, if you're a funding agency, do explore funding beyond the platform, creation of open networks. And this dramatically opens up the vector for impact, because many of your funders are actually impact oriented, and the exponential impact can happen when a network gets formed. And if you're an entrepreneur innovator, participate in community, but build a platform. Go after. This is a perfect time, especially in India with ONDC coming, UHI coming, mobility networks coming, to play the game and actually, without having $1 billion in your pocket, to create a massive potential upside for yourself. Okay. And I thank you for joining today, and I open up now. Subsequently, we'll have a conversation with Jonathan. Jonathan, welcome. And I'll give back to Rajesh here. Rajesh, off to you.
Right. Super, thanks, Pramod. Dot on time. We have another 30 minutes to go, so I'll not take a lot to actually kick off this segment number 2. So this segment essentially is a dialogue series. It's and we're pleased to actually have, as Pramod mentioned, Professor Jonathan Donner. Briefly about Jonathan. So Jonathan is quite a passionate and strong advocate of digital inclusion by himself. He's been a strong proponent of tech for development work, has many hats, plays many roles. He's a senior research director at the Caribou Digital. He has academic positions that he holds with the Fletcher School and so forth. So I've personally been following your work, Jonathan. So I know you also feel quite passionately about this subject. So without further ado, let me just kick off this segment by a leading question to you. And finally, welcome to this session, and super glad you could actually make it.
Thanks so much, Rajesh and Pramod. Thank you guys very much. I've been scribbling notes and very excited to join the conversation now. Thank you very much.
Super. So I'll begin with a leading question to you, Jonathan. So I found some of the background that Pramod mentioned around open networks quite fascinating myself. So given the trajectory of the last 10 years, the role of big tech, the specific geopolitical and socioeconomic climates that we live in today, and even more so in a post-COVID scenario, I'm interested in getting a sense from your perspective, given that you play a different role. You have a sense of the regulatory world, the socioeconomic and political climate as such, and what such digital interventions mean. How prudent is it to actually believe in an idea like open networks? What would it actually mean for something like an inclusive digital economy and so forth? So feel free to share your thoughts on that.
It's the moment is now, right? It's the time to be focused on making sure that the world encodes a digital economy that works for everybody and includes everybody. And I think that the COVID crisis was this pivot moment when, you know, we sort of saw that it wasn't just the moment for a few to be online and, you know, keep doing their Zoom calls like this, but the moment where really you know all life moved online and everything had a digital component to it, including commerce, right? So around the world, I think there's this awareness that, you know, there isn't some separate digital world that a few participate in, but that the sort of digital rails and the digital infrastructures need to support all of daily life and all of daily commerce. And as Pramod was talking this time, I was sort of thinking about an alternate history, right? Where he mentioned how the platforms are playing a particularly strong role in kind of shaping online commerce right now. You could argue that platform commerce is, you know, the third or fourth great thing that mobile phones have provided. They provided voice to everybody first, then they provided payments functionality everybody first. They provided kind of social and entertainment in everybody's pocket. And now we're negotiating what the contours of market participation through the phone will be. The alternate history is this: if the Beckn Protocol were in place and things like ONDC were in place 10 years ago, would we now see this current concentration of the digital landscape, the digital commerce landscape, in just a few big marketplace platforms? I think probably not, right? And that there's still time, and in fact, there's plenty of time to complement or augment or extend or bolt together or kind of unwind the role that those platforms are playing in connecting people to do commerce. So I'm really excited about the platform. And not only, I mean, look, I'll say this last thing, then we'll go into a conversation about it. It's not just the things that we can imagine that are already on the slides that Pramod shared, but the things we can't yet. You know, and it's the interfaces that might get built, or the community ventures that might get created to onboard and on-ramp and support, you know, the not just the next billion, but the billion after that, and even the billion after that, into online commerce and participation. It's things like the protocol and what it unlocks in terms of interoperability, which is going to allow that to be more inclusive and hopefully just include more folks. Let me start with that and see where we go.
Super, super. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's just in its genesis. I mean, the possibilities an open specification effort like this actually presents in itself is quite exciting and ambitious. So I just want to pin on the ambition factor again. So, and I'll probably pose this to Pramod. If you were to trace back to the origins of the DPI efforts of the last 10, 12 years, given your experience in Aadhaar, UPI, and so forth and all, and the trajectory that we actually had to go through, as well as the learnings we had to actually go through as along with amending our efforts along the way. If I were a policymaker, what are the kind of things we would probably have to look at? I mean, how do we ensure that an idea like this, with its unlimited possibilities and so forth, truly achieves population scale? Population scale in itself presents a lot of challenges. And as Jonathan mentioned, socioeconomic coverage, inclusive reality, and so forth are goals that any population scale DPI effort should ensure. So what would be your recommendations for policymakers if they have to be quite aggressive and ambitious on ideas like this?
Yeah, I'm not even sure whether I'm the right person to provide such advice, but at least I can, from the learning we have had, few things come to mind. One, technology is rapidly changing. And technology has never been policymakers' forte. It's almost, it's hard for policymakers to understand it, depth. So either you ignore it, or you get too involved, or you just sort of give it to some vendor, some large tech vendor who's influencing you, like lobbying and so on. So it's policymakers struggle. Frankly, this is the same thing we see with crypto and so on, right? They really don't know. They're completely changing. So one thing you should do, given that it is highly evolving and is highly tech-driven and it is market-driven, these three reasons, because of these three reasons, evolving, tech, and market-driven, policymakers should take a very lightweight approach, almost always, to say, we don't need to overly regulate. Don't try to, come in the way of innovation. Take a very light regulation. I mean, it's the grayscale. I mean, it's a balancing act, but nevertheless, definitely take a lighter regulation mental model. Second, try to understand why the idea of open networks makes sense to them, right? It is important to understand that and not try to do it themselves. I think it's about the idea that what part of their economy that they are dealing with can benefit from something like an open network or a digital public infrastructure. And what does that public infrastructure even mean? By, I think, studying, learning the why behind the why, the real reason of some of these, and appreciating is a very good start. So good start would be to learn about what's going on. Why does that matter to them? How can they apply that? They don't need to know tech for it. They don't need to know, but at least the idea that it makes sense for an agri industry, if you are into healthcare, or if you're into urban mobility, what do you want to do? At least learn that understanding. And the third point, digital infrastructure is almost, again, it's a, by definition of infrastructure, it should be minimal. That minimalism of the infrastructure is not obvious to policymakers, okay? Because we are used to platform. So I'll say, oh, I'll build this, I'll build platform, I'll build data, and I'll watch the data, and no, you can't see everybody's commerce data yourself as a policymaker. That's a bad start, right? So because of privacy argument, surveillance argument, overstepping argument, you have to be cognizant of you have to mentally be ready for the idea that public infrastructure, DPI, by definition is very minimal. So the question you always ask is, what is that you can do just bare minimum to create a domino effect? what is the first domino you can push, and so that you can get a domino effect. So, and stay there, and don't try to do the whole thing yourself. By putting each domino down is a pretty bad way to bring dominoes down, right? You are trying to figure out when is the flip, and there is always timing and societal readiness associated with it. So analyze where you are, who you are, which country, whether readiness, and see whether you are ready for the tipping of the domino, and see whether that plays well to you, your political leadership, your market readiness, and so on. So that's the sort of the fourth item. And the fifth item is definitely India is actually doing a 3-tier approach. Tier 1 as a regulator or the government, trying to be lightweight, not trying to do it themselves. And we will see this in payment, we'll see this in data, we are seeing this in commerce. Don't try to set up a government institution. Try to keep it minimal, but encourage a not-for-profit entity. And India is consistently doing that, what we call a national information utility, a utility company. The way we created power grids as a utility, the way we created highway authority or whatever as a utility, we could create digital utility providers, right? These providers ideally should be not-for-profit. For India, it's definitely a not-for-profit, because if the CEO is paid on the profit motive, the utility turns into something like MasterCard or Visa, right? They were a utility company until early 2000s, and they became a privately owned. Then the CEOs, paycheck, and the investors' returns all mattered at that time. So generally, I think it might be a good idea to keep it, at least for India for sure, not-for-profit entity as a network facilitator. So create the network facilitator, but the network facilitator should be seeded with good techno policy facilitation capable team who can work with open source community on one side, work with market players to listen to the market players on the other side, listen to users on one side, and create shared goals and shared approach to move everyone forward. And that's a facilitation game. It is not a regulation game. It's not a control game. It's a facilitation game. You cannot control the market players, right? You have to facilitate them to innovate around it. So these 5 sort of strategies seem to work for us so far, and we will continue to learn in the long term as well.
Awesome. I think just based on what you said, so it sounds to me like the key theme is decentralization, and that stems into priorities like even governance as well. So even governance have to be decentralized. There's a role for everyone in this journey. Governments are well positioned to play a specific role, but then markets also have to have a critical role in enablement of such open networks, because orthogonal value and benefits are things that even the marketplace would bring in. So I'm just using that segue from what Pramod explained, given the backdrop of India's evolution over the past 10 years. If I were to just transport that to a global view, how exactly can, in your mind, Jonathan, how exactly could we broad-base this idea? Because the idea in itself has a lot of merit, has a lot of power. It is potentially possible to actually bring in a lot of that exponential socioeconomic value to the end consumers and so forth. But does it actually essentially mean that countries would also have to take a trajectory that India took? Or is this a mutually exclusive idea on its own, and innovative efforts could go on its separate path as well, with open networks and the role of the markets in it as well?
It's a global conversation and a global priority right now. There are organizations like the Digital Public Goods Alliance, kind of pushing on the salience of the issue and catalyzing cooperation and knowledge sharing and all, and evangelizing for these sorts of things. India is in a unique position given its initial leadership on, with Pramod and others, I'm sure, on this call, for the other parts of the India stack, to have kind of led by example or innovated by example in things that we can see in some other parts of the kind of digital public goods infrastructure conversation. India's early successes with things like Aadhaar are things that the rest of the world is looking to. I think that same kind of dynamic may play out in approaches to open protocols for digital commerce, in that the innovation that's happening in India is an example and is a model that can be used or can be appropriated or adjusted or adopted. The writing that happens around it, the publication of the code and the sharing of the protocols itself is the only way in which this can happen. But it is a global conversation right now. As Pramod has mentioned, I know that there are at least communities, if not actual active instances, of the protocol being experimented with in other spots. Every country will have its own unique set of challenges, given its own approaches to sovereignty, given its own approaches to what the kind of the politics of the country and its approach towards digital inclusion and economic inclusion may be. Given the size of the country and its ability to kind of counterweight against what the global platforms do. I mean, there are places, there are relatively small countries where these platforms are incredibly important to everyday business, and yet there's barely a staff from the platform in the country. This is happening in languages that the platforms don't speak, right? So things like the protocol allow for countries to more appropriately tailor their own digital economies to suit their contexts. So I think that this is just a really exciting time for this renegotiation of what the digital economy looks like, and again, injecting and facilitating the use of open protocols in that, alongside whatever's happening with platforms and traditional e-commerce, is going to be critical. So yeah, it's global.
Perfect. I think that gives us a sense of a lot of room for optimism into the future. Just drawing in a different perspective, Pramod, given that this has germinated from a specification effort, from as you said, rightly said, like a vibrant community within India, and originating this specification effort. If you were to look at a number of other digital public good efforts, again, centered around global specifications and so forth, specifically, as all of us would know, around identity, around credentials and so forth and on, do you foresee a similar global collaboration on a specification effort, building upon what Beckn has already done? Does this, as Jonathan said, if this has to be broad-based and adopted across the globe, how do you see multiple parties around the globe collaborating to make it a broad-based idea?
Yeah, definitely. I think as part of many of us, many of our work, because it's already open source and so on, and Beckn has nothing specific to India, nothing hard-coded about India there at all there. And that's precisely the reason why the West Africa or European pilots and so on that is being explored and triggered has their own context and their own pain points that they are trying to solve. So I think two ways this can happen, right? One, I believe the traditional open source way. The developers find it, we create a community, some academics and trigger ground up pilots and proof of concepts and innovation around Beckn, and the developer community brings it to the country in that context. In that sense, developers bring the Beckn protocol to various countries, and the other one is slightly more top down, where the way recently we worked on G2P Connect. So G2P Connect was a very, very, very multi-stakeholder collaborative effort, G2pconnect.global website for the listeners. And it basically brings development agencies, digital public good providers, many of them onto a single table, saying we ought to be working together and not in silos to be able to create massive push towards government-to-person payments. So G2P Connect showed us a little bit of interesting playbook, how we can bring multiple stakeholders onto table, because I think the cares and the concerns and are similar and very, very it's and different players might have different priorities, whether it's mobility is a priority, e-commerce is a priority, healthcare is a priority, is irrelevant at that time. But I feel we could also attempt that, and I think we must attempt it. And much of this conversation should lead us towards a multi-stakeholder, sort of international collaborative effort to talk about open networks and open protocols and rejuvenate the 90s or 80s again to say time has come, as Jonathan is saying, for us to be able to really think beyond what next after the platform. Web3 was supposed to be promising that. Web3 promised some of that, partly promised some of this, right? Decentralization and so on. And they did attempt decentralization of assets, but they didn't attempt the decentralization of the transactions, which is what I think Beckn is trying to do. So I feel in many conversations I come across, there is tremendous interest, tremendous alignment. We could approach both from developer to developer community collaboration and both from philanthropists, development organizations, and various public good organizations coming together to create a global narrative and effort would also help. We must attempt and we must create that. I think 2023 is a good time for us to be able to try that. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. So in the paucity of time, I'll probably have just enough time left for one last question. And let me pose that to you, Jonathan. Would like to just extend the argument that Pramod just set out right now, especially if we were to broad-base this effort at a global scale, bring international collaboration and so forth and all. From a different lens, let's say from the academic community, from having a strong economic argument, a strong policy argument, what would be your view? It was great to hear the view from the techno community, but I would also be interested in knowing as to what should be the political, economic, policy response to something like this, so that this becomes a critical infrastructure in every policy or that any government must undertake for economic upliftment of their societies. So what's your view on that?
Well, I think even in the conversation we've had today, I've been struck by the way in which we haven't described this as the magic bullet, right? It is not, just having the open protocol is not going to suddenly change everything about the challenges of making a small business work and feeding your family and sending your kids to school and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't do anything necessarily with people's skills and their ability to be good entrepreneurs. And it doesn't do anything with place, like the ability to move goods from one place to the other, the importance of things like transport and location and who's got a storefront and who doesn't, and who's close to the city center and who's way out in a smaller village or something like that. All these things still matter, right? And these are the sorts of other questions that I think become socio-technical or economic or social, and the protocol doesn't necessarily have to solve all that, nor should we expect it to. But the protocol can solve what the protocol can solve, which is right now it is clear that we have accidentally or without great purpose, built a bunch of parallel locked systems that contain a bunch of transaction data and a bunch of the kind of the nuts and bolts of doing e-commerce that don't need to be that way and can probably be unlocked to great social value and increased productivity and possibly, but not necessarily, greater digital participation and inclusion. So that the economic and policy communities have to kind of have that sharpness of a lens to figure out what the protocols will do and what they can't do, what technology always does, which is let people who know what they're doing do it a little bit better, and what technology only sometimes does, which is lift all boats or let everybody include. But we can update those perspectives beyond the platform imagination to include the protocols and the open networks in those sorts of formulations as we envision what the kind of the terms of participation in the global digital economy will be for everybody. And that's the the priority for that community moving forward. And you guys are a great part of it. It's just fantastic to be a part of this today. Thank you.
Absolutely. It was fascinating discussion, and many thanks to both of you. I wish we had more time, but as both you and Pramod said, this is just a start of a global dialogue. It's bound to have a lot more interesting conversations down the line with a very diverse community and very varied stakeholders as well. So with that promise to keep the dialogue on, let me call an end to this segment. As I said, before I close, it was wonderful to actually have you, Jonathan, as well as you, Pramod, and many thanks for making the session, and would love to keep engaging with you on this particular topic going forward. So with that, this is an end to segment number 2. What I'll probably just do is, in the interest of time, I just have like a couple of minutes. I will just share my screen for some closing slides.
And I've been answering as many questions I can in the Q&A. So sorry,
Perfect.
I can't answer all of them. I may not get the time, but and keep them coming in the Discord community. And we like hundreds of people active out there. So please.
Absolutely. So, I mean, rest assured for everyone, we will make sure that we actually respond to all of your questions. Feel free to engage with the Beckn Open Collective, the community that we have around Beckn. There are a few resources that I would like all of you to take a look at. As you can see on screen, we spoke about a strong community behind the Beckn effort. It's called the Beckn Open Collective. Would love to actually have all of you join this community. We have a very diverse group and a lot of different varied skill sets and so forth from both across the board, the techno community, the policy community, and so forth. And also we have a lot of interesting dialogues happening over there. Would be great to actually see you all of engaging with the rest of us over there. Along with that, we also have a lot of resources available through Beckn. So there is a lot of documentation available around the protocol efforts in itself. It's varied possibilities across sectors, so that we can actually imagine a lot of set of new use cases and so forth and all, along with a lot of digital assets and developer resources that would be available for any techno community to kickstart a new idea using Beckn. So there are many ways to reach us at FIDE, the not-for-profit institution behind the Beckn Protocol. But like as Pramod and all of us have been saying, it's part of a larger community effort behind the Beckn Protocol. So let's all co-create and co-engage in this journey together. Would be great to see all of you. As I said at the beginning, this dialogue series is just, the session today was just a start in that series. We hope to have a lot more deep dives planned in the coming months, some of which you actually see on screen. It will be a collection of varied efforts, some of which dwell into a technical deep dive behind the protocol and a sense of what happens behind the scenes. Some of which are very sectoral in focus, so that we can actually collectively look at what varied use cases using the Beckn Protocol means in different sectors like mobility to health, education and skilling and so forth and on. We'll also have some sessions planned around the community effort in itself, and also bring you up to speed as to on the lot of interesting engagements that are happening behind the scenes across this vibrant community. So please do watch out on our social media handles around Beckn. You should be looking at a lot more interesting engagements coming through this forum down the line. So with that slide, let me end to the session for today. It was wonderful having all of you. I know we took 5 minutes over time, but all the more it was a great session to be introduced to a new digital public good effort and with super possibilities that it actually presents to all of us. So many thanks to Pramod and Jonathan once again for participating in the session and helping us imagine what this idea actually means in its entirety. And super thanks to all of the attendees who've taken out time to engage with us through this session. So with that, good day and thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye, Jonathan.